Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about confiscations. I know I've mentioned in the past how zoos and aquariums kind of get some of their animals. They might catch them from the wild. We do that a lot more with aquariums, I would say, than zoos necessarily, because, it's relatively easy to catch fish. But you can catch animals from the wild. They can be born in a zoo or aquarium and then transferred to, mix up the genetics a little bit. They might be animals that were rehabs and they're not quite releasable. And so they end up in a zoo or aquarium to live out their life comfortably and serving as ambassadors to people so they can learn about those really interesting animals and see what they look like up close and get a gander at their behavior and all that kind of stuff. Another way that we might receive animals, this one's a little unexpected a lot of the time, but it's confiscations. And by that I mean animals that have been intercepted, that were housed illegally, that were being transferred illegally, somehow got into the hands of some sort of police or law enforcement or some other type of, I guess, legal entity that doesn't necessarily have a place to keep those animals, but also needs to make sure that they're taken care of without going back to the wild. Because an issue with confiscations that is really regularly a problem is that we don't know where these animals originally came from. So it might seem simple to just release the animal back to the wild, quote unquote, but a lot of the time we don't really know where that is, or it's not really feasible to do so, or the animals were born in captivity as far as we can tell and have never been in the wild, and what do you do? So that's where a lot of zoos and aquariums come in. We will take on animals to help out our law enforcement, to house animals, at least for temporarily, I guess, and then try to rehome some animals that require it. It's not always somebody who's keeping a cheetah in their backyard or an alligator in their basement that gets into trouble and ends up having their animal confiscated. It does happen sometimes, but the majority, I would say, probably comes from illegal trafficking. So animals that are packed into bags or boxes, or they're just being transported, they're stuffed in someone's pockets, like the most unimaginable crazy stuff to get animals from point A to point B. It could be across the world without being detected and not in the animal's best interests, whether it's for pet trade or for human consumption. There's a lot of reasons that people will transport animals, and more than likely, someone else on the other side is going to pay top dollar for those animals, whether they're planning on eating them or keeping them as pets or doing whatever with them. You could get them for their pelts or their skins or their scales or, whatever. It's an ugly scenario, right? It could be poaching and whatever. You end up with an animal or animal parts or something like that law enforcement has confiscated from the person that they found it on or the owner, and now what do we do with it? So some zoos and aquariums make themselves available to law enforcement for these purposes. We don't necessarily want to hold on to these crazy exotic animals, but we're willing to help out because we know that that's a challenge for people. And we as zoo, aquarium, animal care professionals feel much more confident that we have the ability, the space, the expertise to be able to properly care for those animals, at least temporarily, until the lawsuits finish or what have you, the investigation finishes, or we find a permanent home for those animals. Could be a sanctuary, it could be another zoo or aquarium that's better prepared, it could be any number of solutions, but we try to make ourselves available where we can, where it makes sense to take on some of these animals, to at least give them a home, a place to be, so they're not immediately euthanized just from being illegally kept or carried. I work for an aquarium, so if law enforcement comes across some illegal animals that are aquatic, a sea turtle maybe, stuff like that, I'm happy to try and help out where I can to make sure that those animals are taken care of until the investigation's over. If an animal is found in someone's possession and they don't know what to do with it and they have nowhere to go to take it anywhere, you can't release it to the wild because you don't know where its home is and you don't know anything about it or how to take care of it. Yeah, there's a high chance that that animal could be euthanized just by circumstance. It's not a perfect solution, but do we let the animal go on suffering outside of its normal habitat or with another caretaker who may not do any better? There's a lot of questionable situations where we as zoo and aquarium professionals are just trying to help out to make sure that the animals thrive wherever they are, however they are, right? So if that means that I take a sea turtle that's being illegally transported for a while and just hang on to it and try to give it its best life while it's with us until we can find a better place for it to be, then so be it. That's perfectly fine by me. I'd much rather have a live sea turtle that's in good health and well cared for that I don't know what to do with than for that animal to be euthanized or something like that. It's just a little bit of a more of extreme case. They probably wouldn't do that with a sea turtle specifically because they're endangered, but you get what I mean. So I've dealt with confiscated turtles, Asian turtles, seahorses, like all kinds of stuff. These animals come from all over the place and they come at unexpected times. And so we just have to be ready and willing to set up something or move some animals around so that we can take care of them. The good thing with zoos and aquariums, at least AZA facilities, a lot of time we have the space and the menu to be able to accommodate a lot of different types of animals. So if somebody were to come to me and tell me that they have a giraffe that they need to have someone take care of, I'm happy to help for probably a day, but I'm definitely going to be calling a zoo. I work for an aquarium. We don't keep giraffe food around, but if you came across like an endangered turtle or lizard or something, there's much more likely going to be a place that I can put that and feed that animal. But we try to figure it out, right? Obviously, law enforcement's not going to be calling an aquarium to take care of some large African mammal, right? That is generally not going to fly. But they might call and say, do you know who we could call? And, we're all kind of networked together. We know each other. We have connections. And so we'll contact each other to try and find the best solution. And when it comes to confiscations, we are much more quick moving and willing to, I don't know, not necessarily bend the rules, but maybe bend the rules a little bit for our own facilities. So normally we would not just accept a random animal that we were not expecting. But for confiscation purposes, if it's in the best interest of the animal, we will do that, right? So even though it's not planned, we'll bend our own rules just a little bit to make sure that that animal is well taken care of and has a place to live. And we generally work together for that. So if I have a law enforcement official call me and say that, oh, we've got 500 of these birds, can you help us out? Sure, I will do what I can. I will probably do my very best to keep them safe and healthy overnight in a space that we have on hand. But you better believe I'm also coordinating with other facilities in my area and people who know that particular animal very well, get some tips and tricks from them, ask for help from them, and pool resources so that those animals are well taken care of. I have no doubt that if I called the local zoo and said, listen, I've got these animals coming in, can you give me any details about how you would take care of them? Do you have this food available right now? I could go down the road and pick it up in my little car because I know that they would help me with that, or they would send someone to me to help out with that, right? We work together on this kind of stuff because we want the animals to be well taken care of. So even though this is unexpected, we weren't necessarily prepared for that. We do have the network and the resources available kind of locally. It depends on your area and what the situation is, but I know I'm pretty confident in my area that I would be able to call local aquariums and zoos for help and they would come running for the good of the animals. In years past, we would consider each other kind of competition, and to some degree we kind of still are. But when it comes to the animal care, we're all in it together. Like, we're all going to do the best we can by the animals to make sure that everything's taken care of. Not only does it make the animals' lives better, it kind of gives our professionals a little bit more exposure to stuff that can happen and how to think on their feet, and it's good experience basically. And not only that, it reflects well on our business, on our facility, that we're willing to drop everything and help out, and we do that for each other. So it's a stressful situation, and it's unexpected, and it's not super fun to deal with in the moment, but it does make you feel good. Like, you're helping out law enforcement, which is great. You're helping out your local community, which is also great. You're helping out the animals, which is spectacular. And you're kind of developing these partnerships and learning more about how this all works. In the past, I've had to take care of animals and just keep them there in my facility for X amount of time. And it's usually involving some sort of investigation. This person or these people who had these animals and did not have the correct paperwork or permits or anything like that, were they allowed to have those animals? So the investigation will go into what paperwork do they have? Do they have the proper permit filed, but they just don't have a copy of it on hand? Like, there's a lot of different reasons why an animal might be confiscated, but also might then go back to the person that it was confiscated from. So say they have a permit to keep the animal, but they don't have it with them right at the moment that law enforcement was questioning what was going on. Law enforcement saw something that was weird. They didn't have the proper paperwork to prove that it wasn't on hand at that moment. So that animal may come to the zoo or the aquarium for a little while, maybe a day or two, but it might go back to that original owner because they produced the correct paperwork, or there's been some long-standing agreement, or wherever they're coming from does not require this kind of permit, right? That's also a challenge that we deal with. Transporting animals across state lines or across country lines even is a hairy business. The rules are not the same for every state. So I've been dealing with this recently, transporting animals to, say, Florida. Florida has much more stringent rules about what can and can't come in and which types of animals fall under what type of permit. It's understandable because Florida is overrun by invasives. Like, there's a lot of invasive animals in Florida that shouldn't be there that have kind of taken over. And so their ability to protect their land and waters from invasive species is limited. It's a challenge there because animals tend to thrive there. Anything tropical can live in Florida. Like, so they have to be much more concerned with what people are bringing in and out of Florida animal-wise, because they don't want invasives coming in. They don't want their native species being taken out, like all that kind of stuff. So you have to go through the process of finding the right permits and being granted permission and communicating well with the state and all that kind of stuff. Where I am, my state's totally different. So they're like, whatever, you want to transport what kind of animal? Sure, go ahead. You don't have to have any paperwork for that. But still, since we're going from state to state, we got to make sure that all the paperwork's in line. And 90% of the time, it's perfectly fine, even if you don't necessarily have a printed copy of all that paperwork. As long as the communication's good, you're good to go to transport the animals as you need to. But in the case that you get into an accident or something happens, law enforcement may end up with your precious cargo, which could be an animal, right? In the past, I've transported venomous snakes, and I've had to double, triple bag and box them because if something were to happen where maybe I got into a car accident or something, we could not risk the animal getting out because it's a danger to people. So, and it might be invasive, right? So, we have to be very, very particular about how we transport that, what kind of paperwork we have along with that, and what's going on with that animal. Does anything happen? Probably not. The transports that I've done have been very uneventful. I've been very fortunate. But there's a possibility that something could happen, that there's now an exotic animal sitting there on the road or in the car, and police are asking, what are you doing? Why do you have a sea turtle in your back seat? Like, and I have to show the paperwork for that. Now, if I can't, they may confiscate that animal, whatever it is, and take it to or call a animal care shelter, a rehabber, a zoo or aquarium to find somewhere to put that animal before they have to decide to euthanize it because they don't have anywhere else for it to go, right? So these are the kinds of calls that zoos and aquariums get in the middle of the night because law enforcement's just run across this person who's carrying, 50 exotic turtles in their pocket, and those turtles need a place to go. They need to eat food, they need water, they're dehydrated, they need care. And so that's when we have to answer. And we'll pool whatever resources we can. We'll make sure that we have all of the details that we need to just take care of those animals temporarily while that investigation's going on, right? So sure, that person could have had 50 exotic turtles in their pockets, but there may be a reason for it. They might have the permits for it. Would I suggest that they transport them that way? Absolutely not. I think they need to take better care of the animals. But if they have the proper paperwork, those animals might need to be packed right up and go back to that person. Granted, we'd probably offer them some bins and some food and some towels and all that kind of stuff to make the animals a little bit more comfortable so that they're not dehydrating while they're on their trip and so that their health is in good order as they move, right? But there's a possibility that that animal could go back to the owner or to the person that it was confiscated from. So there are times where we're only taking care of animals for a little while and we're just trying to finish up an investigation to see what the future of that animal is going to be. And in facilities where I've worked, I've taken care of animals for months and months while they do the investigation and try to figure out what's going on. And then when it concludes, sometimes they're like, okay, the animal's going back, or sometimes they're like, you can keep it. So in that case, you've probably been keeping the animals apart from the rest of your collection because you don't know if they're going to go back, right? You can't necessarily put them on display and use them like you would your other animals, like for exhibit purposes or, animal ambassadors or anything like that. You may not be able to train them the same way that you do the rest of your collection and that sort of thing because you don't know if they're going to go back, right? You're allowed to do what you can to make sure that they have optimal care. So you may offer them some training, some enrichment, get them engaged in their day-to-day activities and that kind of stuff, and look out for their best interests in that way to make sure that their well-being's good. But you still may not be able to incorporate them into your collection and not maybe introduce them to animals of the same species that you might already have on hand because they might have to go back. They might have to go back to that owner that they were confiscated from if the investigation concludes and they decide that the owner will keep the animal, or they decide that the owner is going to transfer the animal to a different zoo or aquarium or rehabber or sanctuary or something like that. There's a lot of different things that can happen. So when we do get confiscated animals, if there's an investigation on, we have to make sure that we understand what's happening. We understand where those animals should be kept, and we're in good communication with law enforcement about like what kind of decisions we can make on that animal's behalf. Obviously, we're going to give them medical care, but we may not breed them, right? So these are all things that we have to keep track of while we're caring for animals that were not necessarily part of our plan. And in the end, the investigation may conclude and they tell us to keep them, in which case we're free to, introduce them to the animals of the same species that we have already and let them breed and like all this other kind of fun stuff. So that is a way that you can come across animals you never thought you would have had. One institution where I worked, we had exotic turtles. They were so cute and little when I first started working with them, and we kept them apart for a little bit until their investigation concluded, and then they were like, okay, good luck, have fun with those turtles. And then we realized, oh, these are big turtles that are really charismatic and fun, but we don't have an exhibit for them. I'm not sure, we can't really justify keeping them off exhibit and just in the back of the zoo, an aquarium for forever, right? So we ended up actually building an exhibit for them. It was kind of an accident that we had them in the first place, but it worked out really well because we made an exhibit for them and they were thriving there, right? We did eventually have to move some of them out because they got very, very large. So that was a little bit of a challenge. But it was an interesting opportunity. These were some of the rarest turtles in the world, and it was really interesting to be able to work with them. And I loved them. And I, as a animal care professional, learned a lot from working with them. Learned a lot about what they need, how big they get, their little personalities and stuff. But now I can carry that forward, and I've seen other turtles like that, and I have had lots of shop talk with turtle nerds from working with these very rare turtles. And so it's really interesting how much like professional development you can get out of confiscations when it happens. We weren't supposed to be keeping these animals forever, but it turns out that we had the best place for them, at least short term, and so we kept them all for a long time. But then, after they started to grow and we realized just how big they get, yeah, we sent them off to do other things with other zoos and aquariums. They were kind of on breeding loans because they're very rare turtles. And if we could get them to reproduce, that's all the better for the population as a whole. So we can end up kind of turning a confiscation type of an issue into something positive. Let's be honest, those turtles were meant to be eaten. That's why they were being transported the way that they were. And the fact that we were able to get our hands on them as a zoo and aquarium kind of entity and provide them really good care and grow them big and strong and send them out into the zoo and aquarium world to reproduce, to hopefully reintroduce their offspring to wild populations, that's awesome. Like, that's a total turnaround from what they were in for while being transported illegally to where they've ended up now. So I feel like that's a success story. Not all of them end up that way, but that's how we get some of our animals. We're working in conjunction with law enforcement and certain groups of government officials so that we can be on call to provide really good animal care to animals who are in desperate need of it. We have vets on hand. We have vets that are on call, ready to go any time of day or night. And so if you've got a very exotic animal that you don't know how to take care of and you're in law enforcement, you can call a zoo or aquarium in your area for help. If that facility does not know how to help, then they probably have the networking available to lend some sort of aid. So maybe that first night, we might not be able to handle that animal right away, but we can tell you, keep it warm, wrap it with towels, da 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 da. We'll be there in the morning, right? Once we have prepared a space for it and we have a secure area that's apart from the rest of our collection, because again, we don't know where this animal's been. We want to protect our collection and all of our animals from any kind of illnesses or disease or parasites or anything like that. So we want to keep these animals separate. We may not be immediately ready to take them, but you know what? Give us a few hours, we'll probably be ready. Not only that, depending on the situation, depending on the number of animals involved and the expertise needed for them, we may reach out to our network to try and find food and supplies and hands, other animal care professionals, so we can all kind of converge on these confiscated animals, maybe distribute them as needed, or at least find a plan for them, find the best situation for them, so that while the legal process plays out, the animals are in good care and good health. It's a wild, unexpected call when you get a confiscation call, but it can be really good. You may come across some very exotic animals that you would never have run into otherwise. You may not have planned for them, but they can change your life in really good ways. You learn a lot more because you never really thought about these animals or thought you would ever see one in real life, right? How crazy is that? And then you can live with the fact that you have been a part of the rescue of this animal from possibly illegal pet trade or illegal transport, and given this animal a chance to thrive in a zoo or aquarium and let other people learn about them because they never would have seen them otherwise. So it is but one way that we come across animals and obtain animals for our collections in zoos and aquariums, but it's a really niche, interesting, chaotic way that some zoos and aquariums have come across very wild and exotic animals. And just as a note, for me in the aquarium world, I feel like the confiscated animals that I've worked with have less baggage overall than perhaps some charismatic megafauna that might be confiscated for a zoo or aquarium, for a zoo or like marine mammals in an aquarium. So if you have animals like, say, like a wolf that somebody has been keeping at their home illegally that's confiscated, that animal may have some issues, whether it's an improper diet or weird training and attachment to somebody who is not in their life anymore at this point because they were confiscated. Like, there's a lot that can happen there that can impact the well-being of an animal, right? So we're constantly trying to figure out, is this what's best for the animal? Is this what we should be doing? Is there some behavior that we need to deal with or train with or try to build some, sort of relationship with this animal to make things better? In the end, we can usually kind of navigate those things, but that adds another layer of issue to it. A lot of times when you're dealing with primates that were hand raised by people who just I don't want to say they didn't know what they're doing, but sometimes they don't do what's best for the animal as it's being raised. So basically, you've got a primate who thinks it's a person. That primate is probably going to have a lot of trouble integrating into a group of similar species primates instead of bonding with keepers directly, right? So that primate has been raised by humans in a situation that's very different than a zoo, and they find themselves like scared and not sure of what's going on. The only constant there is the keepers. They may be drawn more to keepers than their own species, is what I'm trying to say. And sometimes, and I have dealt with this in the aquarium world, when you're dealing with animals that were not fed properly as they were developing, when they're adults, they can develop a lot of health problems. So I've seen that in crocodilians, I've seen that in fish, I've seen that in turtles. If you do not take proper care of animals throughout their life and depending on their life stage, by the end, when they're adults and getting into like elderly stages, their health is really, really poor and they might have a shortened lifespan because of it. But we just do the best that we can and hope for the best. We want to give those animals the best life that we can for as long as they're with us, whether that's a matter of days or a matter of years, right? So even though we didn't plan for their arrival because they're confiscation that kind of fell into our laps unexpectedly, we still try to do what's best for the animal for the long term. So we are very closely evaluating behavior to make sure that they're integrating well into the new situation and that we're kind of dealing with their stress and trying to help them calm down. And we're just trying to make sure that their diet's good, that their health is good, that they have what they need to thrive, and that we're doing the best we can by them for however long that they're with us. So it's a weird way to obtain animals. It's not one that we plan for or depend on a whole lot because you never know when that's going to happen. At this point, it's been years since I've had a confiscation, but I'm part of a group that we're talking about it quite frequently, and we want to be, my facility as a whole wants to be an option for when the right types of animals are available and have been confiscated somehow or fall into the hands of police and law enforcement, that we're available and ready to help. We may not be the last stop for these animals, but at least while they're with us, we're going to do the best we can with them so that they're healthy for as long as they're with us. So it's a weird thing, but it's a thing that happens and a thing that we have to be ready for. You don't necessarily have to take the animals either, but we try to just because we want those animals well taken care of. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. If you have any questions about that or other zoo and aquarium things or leadership and management stuff, you can write it up in an email and send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget you can follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you'd like to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.